Let's dive right into Photoshop. So if you go ahead and open the Photoshop app, you should see something like this. I'm using, at the time of this recording, the latest and newest version of Photoshop CC, which is the 2020 version. You can check out the version of your Photoshop by going to the Photoshop menu at the top, clicking About Photoshop, and then you can see 21.0.1, which is this current release. If you're using an older version of Photoshop or a newer version of Photoshop, that should be perfectly fine. Photoshop and Adobe make some changes over time, and I'll make sure to update this course with any major updates, but the process of using Photoshop has stayed relatively the same over the past 5+ years, and so you should be able to follow along no matter what version you're using. So the first thing you're probably wondering is, how do I get started? There are a few different ways to open up a project in Photoshop. So how do you open up a project or a photo in Photoshop? It's actually really easy. If you go to your documents and download the supplemental resources for this course, you'll have a zip file, and if you open it up, it should have a number of folders just like this. There will probably be some additional ones that I add to it over time as well. But starting out, we're going to work through the projects 1 through 9 and then go beyond that with some additional projects later. If you go under each project folder, you should find the photos that I've used or the assets that I've used for this project, as well as the Photoshop file. So PSD is a Photoshop file. And within each folder, you should find a couple different options. You should find one that is the final version, which is the version that I created myself so that you can have as a reference for what you might be trying to get to, and then also a starter project. So how do you open up a Photoshop file? You can right-click, click Open in Photoshop, or if you only have one version of Photoshop, I have two versions on my computer, CC 2019 and CC 2020, so it gives me the option. But if you just double-click that project, it should open it up. Now, what if you want to just open up an individual photo in Photoshop to work with? You can go to Photos, or any photo that you have on your computer, really. Right-click that photo and choose Open in Photoshop. And that's going to open that photo up in Photoshop. There are other ways to open a file. You can have Photoshop Open, File, Open, and that will open up your documents. And from here, you can find either a Photoshop file or a photo, and it will open it up in Photoshop if you click Open. Lots of different ways to open an existing file. Now, you might be wondering, how do I create a file that is an exact square or a specific size? We're going to be covering that in the next section. Don't worry about that. But now you know how to open up different file types in Photoshop. I know this might look very confusing to you, and don't worry, we are going to be going over the interface and everything like that in the next lessons. But for now, I think you deserve a round of applause because you can now at least open Photoshop, even if you can't do anything yet. If you already are very comfortable with Photoshop, I know this is probably pretty basic for you, but it is a good first step for anyone who's just starting out. So I'll meet you in the next lesson, which is going to be a deeper dive into the interface and the workspace and customizing it so that you can really set it up to be efficient as a Photoshop editor. All right, see you then.